The topic of my talk is your friendly, successful psychopath. You're probably wondering, how does that make sense? Aren't psychopaths supposed to be bad people? You're probably thinking of Dr. Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs, or the Joker from Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. Well, I'll hand it to you. You're right. Psychopaths are bad people. Okay, or psychopaths, to be more specific, are bad people. They have horrible traits like a tendency for violence and an absolute lack of conscience. At the same time, they also have phenomenally positive traits of charm, focus, and determination, among other traits. If you're a person who has only the good traits of a psychopath, you are a good psychopath. I am a good psychopath. How do I know that? Because I tested myself on a website by Kevin Dutton. Kevin Dutton is an Oxford psychologist who's one of the leading authorities in psychopathy in the world. He's written plenty of books on psychopathy, and my favorite one is The Wisdom of Psychopaths. He's also established that the best chief executives in the world, the best entrepreneurs, startup heads, doctors, and lawyers tend to be good psychopaths. So I'm going to share with you 4 traits that good psychopaths have, and you can acquire those traits to do whatever you're doing in an exponentially successful way. So let's start with the first one. It has to do with a human tendency called loss aversion. Let me give you a very simple example of what loss aversion means. Let's think of a guy who's quite intelligent. His name is Mr. X. He buys a stock at 100 rupees. That stock is now at 90 rupees. He's pretty confident that it will never go to 100 rupees again in his lifetime. In fact, he's very confident that the chances of that stock going from 90 to 0 is pretty high, yet he just sits on it and lets his wealth wither away under his very nose. Why? Because he just can't book losses. Plenty of people just feel crappy booking losses. And that has to do with evolutionary biology. When we were cavemen, losing food, losing a friend could mean instant death. Well, today it doesn't mean that, but still it's millions of years of hardwiring, and that's why people have a very irrational fear in booking a loss, even when booking that loss makes perfect sense. So how do psychopaths think? Psychopaths do not care. They are immune from loss aversion. There was an exercise given to psychopaths and non-psychopaths. There was no reward for getting the exercise right, but there was a punishment for failing that exercise. And the punishment was electric shocks. The psychopaths did worse at that job than the normal guys. The psychopaths just did not think that there was anything too bad about getting electrical shocks and losing their sense of comfort. Now that game was tweaked slightly. This time, if you failed, you got shocks, but if you succeeded, you got rewarded. This time, psychopaths did much better. So psychopaths are not that influenced by failure. They're not that influenced by losses, but they're extremely, extremely influenced by rewards and tend to really work hard towards it. So what can you do to escape this curse of loss aversion, which is in your brain and has been passed on to you from millions of years of evolution? Start wasting food. Yes, you heard that right. Start wasting food. Because in plenty of cases, you finish your hunger first, and then you finish your plate. It doesn't make any sense. So why do you do it? Because when you were a child, your mom said, "Finish your plate, there are people dying." And that stuck with you. So if you consciously start doing that, wasting food, there's a good chance that you're going to stop yourself being a victim of loss aversion. So that's the first lesson. Start wasting food. The second trait is mindfulness. Psychopaths are laser focused on whatever they're focusing on whatever they're working on. The world around them could crumble. It doesn't matter. They don't get emotionally affected. They don't get cognitively affected. What can you do to enhance your mindfulness? Avoid two of the greatest enemies of the brain today: distraction and multitasking. Let me start with multitasking first. Plenty of people use this term loosely, and plenty of people do not even know the definition of multitasking. So here's the definition of multitasking by an award-winning neuroscientist, Richard Restick. Multitasking is doing more than one thing at one time that requires conscious attention. So I'm talking to you right now, and I'm standing at the same time. Standing is automatic. I don't really need to pay too much conscious attention to standing, and hence I'm not multitasking. The definition is just fiction. It just defines a process, but that process is fiction. The human brain cannot do more than one thing consciously at one time. And some of you are thinking, oh, that's rubbish. I have seen people do multitasking under my very nose. And that normally is the experience with women. Plenty of people think that women can multitask and men can't. That is totally erroneous belief. What that person that you've seen is actually doing is switching between tasks. So they're trying to do two tasks at one time. They're paying the optimal attention to this task and paying suboptimal attention to this task. And then they keep switching. So multitasking can be defined as screwing more than one thing at one time. Now, this kind of switching is actually terrible. It's terrible in the short run because this switching consumes your brain energy. Your brain energy comes from glucose, and there is a limited supply. So if you're going to keep switching, you literally have less brain power available for the rest of the brain work that you're going to do throughout the day. That's the short-term disadvantage. The long-term disadvantage is even worse. All this switching causes bad stress. Bad stress causes loss of neurons. And loss of neurons causes terrible diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. So it's really much worse than most people think it is. Let's talk about the second one, distraction. So plenty of people say, oh, I don't need a TEDx talk to tell me about the dangers of distraction. What is the big deal anyway? I'm doing some work on my computer. I'm talking to a client. I have a 1-hour meeting. I get 2 or 3 calls, and I say, I'm busy. I'll call you back. So in a 1-hour period, I may have been distracted for maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute. What's the big deal? It is a very, very big deal. Because according to research by Harvard Business Review, every time you're distracted, you actually lose 15 minutes because that's how much time the brain takes to get back into a substantial level of activity to focus on what you are doing. So if you're not careful about distraction, you're probably leading your entire life using your brain in a very, very suboptimal way. So avoid multitasking and distraction. Be mindful. To take a quote from Rajnikant, mind it. Let's move on to the third one, influence. Psychopaths are, in the words of Kevin Dutton, natural-born persuaders, or they're expert influencers. They can literally, like an X-ray machine, scan people's emotional states and then decide which strategy of influence to deploy on which people. Let me give you one of the most powerful tools of influence. And this is something I learned from none other than the godfather of influence, Bob Cialdini himself. Again, the strategy appears to be something very, very simple, and you might be wondering, why do I need a TEDx talk for this? But you probably didn't know how powerful this strategy was, and I'm also going to give you 2 distinctions which you probably didn't think of. So the strategy is, do as many favors as you can to the people that you want to influence without going broke. Now, why is that such a powerful strategy of influence? It again goes back to caveman days. In caveman days, it was very important for us to be very, very strongly connected with people from our tribe. If we didn't do that, for obvious reasons, we died very fast. So if somebody did us a favor when we were cavemen, we were very eager to repay that favor so that that person doesn't ostracize us and we don't find ourselves alone and dying very fast. And that has, again, rewired our brain in a very, very deep way. So if you do a favor for someone, there is a strong impulse on the other person to do a favor back to you. And that's why this is a very, very powerful, it's an industrial strength tool of influence. So let me give you two powerful distinctions here. You've done a favor for someone, and that person says, thank you. Now, how will you respond at that moment? Most people in the world just don't know. Most people in the world have been conditioned to say something like, you're welcome, it's my pleasure. These are the most stupid answers. They're the wrongest answers. That's like doing a favor and then just, it's like making a painting and just rubbing it with a foul sponge. You should do a variation of these three statements. You got to say, I'm sure you would do the same for me too. Or that's what friends do for each other. Or that's what partners do for each other. Now, what are you doing with this statement? You are subtly, under the radar, you're going under his brain literally, and you're giving the message, yes, I have done you a favor. And yes, I expect you to respond with another favor as soon as possible. Okay, it's a very subtle, it's a very friendly way of saying it. You don't do a favor and say, now I've got you, you're my slave. No. He will unfriend you and block you on Facebook immediately if you do that. Okay, so that's distinction number one. Distinction number two is after you do a favor, see if you can get that person to do a favor back to you ASAP. Why? Because research has shown that as time passes by, the value of that favor in the mind of the person who receives the favor reduces. So if you don't act fast, again, it's just like doing a lot of work and then just throwing it down the drain. So if you want to be an influence superman, be a favor man. Let's talk about the fourth trait of psychopaths that can help you become exponentially successful, and that is mental toughness. Okay, now most men find it very difficult to pick up women. Okay, not the men who are watching this talk, I'm not talking about them, but other men. Yeah, and this is not a talk about picking up women. Picking up women is just an analogy for how we live a life. At every time we want something or the other. So it's just an analogy. So Kevin Dutton was at Broadmoor. Broadmoor is a place in UK which has the quote-unquote best psychopaths. And a psychopath was talking about how he's very good at picking up women. What's his secret? He just goes from rejection to rejection to rejection without loss of energy. That's it. And that reminds me of Winston Churchill's saying, his definition of success was going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. So how do you do that? How do you inculcate mental toughness? Start studying mathematics, start studying probability, and start becoming more rational. And you will see that success has a pattern. The most successful people in the world really took a lot of action. They kept moving from failure to failure to failure and just took a lot of action, produced lots of failures, and then managed to produce some gems. Okay, Pablo Picasso, his most expensive painting apparently sold for $100 million. By the time he died, he had 20,000 pieces of art. So obviously, all of them were not great pieces. Obviously, there were lots of quote-unquote failures in those 20,000 pieces of art. But then that led him to become such a successful artist. Edison had 29,000 notebooks full of ideas. 29,000 notebooks full of ideas before he died. So you see the amount of quantity produced, it's just sheer mathematics. The more work you do, the greater your probability of success. So, in short, slog your butt off and keep calm. So I want to end with a statement that's inspired by the Joker in Dark Knight. You see, good psychopaths are not crazy. We are just ahead of the curve. Thank you.